So I'm scratching my head going, all the data shows that Russia is one of the biggest threats from a cybersecurity standpoint, yet the White House seems to be taking a different angle that we can trust them and no longer need to go after them.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've had Eric Cole on the show. He's a former CIA hacker and cybersecurity expert who's spoken to us about this new move from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He ordered the US Cyber Command to halt offensive operations against Russia. So he's told us what this means, why cybersecurity is politicized, whether Donald Trump trusts Putin. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube page every single day, Monday through Friday. Eric, quietly without making major headlines until, I guess, last night, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the US Cyber Command to halt offensive operations against Russia. Now, in layman's terms, can you explain what exactly this means?
What this means is when you're looking at any war, and we're in a cyber war right now with Russia, is there's offense and there's defense. So defense is all about protecting and keeping America safe, but then offense is targeting and going after targets in Russia that are hurting us and causing harm, which is a lot. So this idea that all of a sudden, without any agreement, we're doing this very one-sided notion of we're going to stop offensive operations, it's very, very concerning, because the reality is Russia's not stopping their offensive operations. So now if we're not attacking Russia, we must increase our defense, because it's going to put us in a position of weakness if we're not actively going after them and targeting them like they're targeting us.
So why wouldn't Donald Trump announce this, Eric?
This is one of the many mysteries of the current administration, where I'm sure many of us are left with a lot of questions and wondering sort of what the strategy is. So there could be a lot of reasons for this. One is that we want to sort of show goodwill towards Russia, because there's the war going on. In the previous administration, it was a very adversarial relationship with Russia. And I know President Trump wants to sort of smooth operations with Russia. So I don't know if this is a peace offering, that he's like, okay, we're going to stand down first and hope that the Russians follow. But my concern is the Russians typically don't follow what the U.S. does. So if we're going in and we're stopping offensive operations, but there's no formal agreement, the question is that really going to be a good thing, or is it going to put America at greater risk?
And the likelihood, Eric, is that Putin and the Kremlin probably won't follow through with also standing down their kind of security operations on their side as well.
It does not look like it. And honestly, if I was in Russia and I was advising Putin, I would actually increase offensive operations against the U.S., because essentially this is a hall pass. Normally, the way it works is, like, if you look in the Cold War in the 80s with nuclear weapons, is offense was a deterrent. If we tried to attack you, you would try to attack us, and then we would both stand down. So the fact that we're now saying we're not going to attack you, if I was in Russia, I would crank up cyber operations, because that means there's more exposure, there's more vulnerabilities, and essentially there's no impact. If Russia attacks us more, there's no negative impact to them. Normally, if they attacked us more, we would fight back. But the fact that said we're not going to fight you means they're going to start throwing some much bigger punches, which is really, really scary, because Russia has already impacted American billions of dollars of monetary loss. So if they increase their offensive operations, that could be a huge impact to America.
So this move, Eric, it would have been, as we said, at the command of Donald Trump, and it's reported the reason is, as you kind of mentioned, it's for the Trump administration to draw President Putin into talks with Ukraine to end this war and also strengthen the relationship with the United States. Is it too much of a risk for US intelligence to be brokering this peace deal through this way? Can you kind of argue that this was a concession the United States was willing to make on behalf of Ukraine?
Yeah, the big challenge and issue right now is we only have one piece of the puzzle. So one piece of the puzzle is we're standing down offensive operations against Russia. What we don't know is, are we actually going to increase defense? Are we doing other things? Are we tailoring other operations? If all we did was just stop offensive operations against Russia and there's no other pieces to that puzzle, then I'm very, very concerned, because that's a very, very risky move. Now, on the other hand, if we're going in and instead of all the money we're spending on offensive operations, we're now putting all those resources to increasing our security, increasing our defense, and doing more defensive operations to help U.S. companies, then that actually could be a good thing. But the problem is they've only given us limited insight into what they're doing. And right now it seems very one-sided and very political.
Well, the New York Times labelled this move a gamble from both Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth to essentially give up any knowledge of tracking what Putin could be operating. He could be kind of launching a shadow war amidst negotiations. Do you agree that this would be a gamble to do amidst a time where we don't know what kind of war Putin is operating online?
It's definitely a big gamble, because like you said, we don't have a lot of information or data of what's happening. On the one hand, what we might be thinking is, if we stop offensive operations against Russia, maybe Russia will say, okay, let's put our offensive operations against Ukraine and others and less against the US. So there is a chance that Russia might follow suit and divert their resources. But as we said, the other option is they might use this as an opportunity for exploitation. But the other thing we have to remember too is us publicly coming out and saying we're stopping offensive operations, the general saying that. The question we have to ask is that really sort of a olive branch for Russia, or are we doing that as a diversion tactic? And then really behind the scenes, we're still continuing offensive operation? Because one thing in tradecraft is you tell the adversary one thing and then you do something different.
So Eric, if Donald Trump is actually orchestrating this as basically a plot to see if Putin is on the United States' side, would that be a good thing for Donald Trump to kind of just like, you know, put his toes in the water to see, can we trust Putin?
To me, it would actually be a good thing. And I believe it's something that President Trump has to do. My concern is cyber really the right battleground to do that? My concern is cybersecurity shouldn't be political, right? Cybersecurity is about protecting information, protecting data, keeping individuals safe, keeping children safe, keeping our bank accounts safe, keeping our identity safe. And my concern is that cyber is now being used as a political weapon and trying to politicize it. And when you're starting to politicize cybersecurity, it becomes scary, because that's when people get hurt, identities get stolen, and money gets lost. So my question is cybersecurity really the right tool for Donald Trump to be using to playing these political games?
And on the other hand, Eric, does this show that Donald Trump might no longer view Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin as a national security threat?
That's another great question, which is, why are we going in and saying we're almost trusting Russia, right? Saying we're not going to do offensive operations is essentially telling the American public that we believe Russia is not really a threat, that Russia's not really a big concern. The problem is the numbers don't support it. If you look at the numbers, the two biggest countries that are targeting us are China and Russia. China is all about stealing intellectual property, and Russia is all about monetary attack against Americans. So my concern is the data is showing that cyber attacks against Russia are increasing. From 2023 to 2024, it more than doubled.
Right.
This year, it's predicted to triple the amount of monetary damage from Russia. So I'm scratching my head going, all the data shows that Russia is one of the biggest threats from a cybersecurity standpoint, yet the White House seems to be taking a different angle, that we can trust them and no longer need to go after them.
Eric, say the Kremlin do hack into US intelligence, and as you mentioned, their objective with hacking does come down to monetary gain. What is kind of the worst thing that can happen to Americans if Russia were to hack into the data and to systems?
So there's really two worst case scenarios. One is what I call the overt piece, which is what we're visibly seeing. So from one standpoint, the amount of attacks against bank accounts, against American citizens, the amount of identity theft, we can see increase rapidly. We can see a lot more monetary loss, a lot more harm, a lot more identity theft. But the one that scares me even more is what I call the covert impact, which is what if Russia is going in and they're slowly leaking and copying all of our data, all of our information, all of our secret plans, all of our information about weapons, about strategy, about all those factors, and then they're going to use that against us over the next 3 to 5 years. So everyone thinks about cyber attacks as visible attacks against our bank account. But the reality is there's what we call advanced persistent threats, where there's long-term attacks, where if Russia can gain access to US intelligence and covertly steal that and use that against us, that could have a huge impact for the next 5, 10, or 15 years.
So if Russia does hack into US data and its systems, once Russia is in, does it stay in, basically?
And that's the big issue with cyber attacks is once somebody gets access, it's very difficult to remove them. It's almost impossible to get them out because these attacks are not just going in and breaking into one system. They're going in and infecting tons of systems. Think of COVID from a cybersecurity standpoint. The problem with COVID is how quickly and rapidly it spread. It didn't target one person or one individual. It impacted so many people that trying to get your arms around it was difficult. Imagine a cyber virus equivalent to COVID, where it breaks into government systems and infects all the systems rapidly, very quickly. What if every government system was infected?
Wow.
Unless we go in and we replace the entire infrastructure, replace every computer, every router, every server, which is impossible for us to do. The reality is getting rid of these types of cyber COVIDs is almost impossible because they spread so quickly and so rapidly.
Like a domino effect. But Eric, the French Foreign Affairs Minister said that he had trouble understanding the decision from Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, as a number of EU countries are constantly the targets of Russian cyber attacks. Is that true from your interpretation?
We are definitely missing key information. There's definitely key data here. One thing that I think we've learned from his first term in office is President Trump always has a plan. He always has a master plan, and he doesn't always reveal the whole plan for security reasons. So to me, this is a small piece of the puzzle. And if we look at it in isolation, it could be very, very concerning. But if we step back and realize that there's probably a much bigger strategy and a much bigger plan, this actually could play out to be a positive thing for the U.S.
And of course, we're not sure what discussions have gone on with Trump and Putin. We don't know if this was a negotiation that they've had, off the record, just between the two of them with each of their respective teams. So we don't know if this was something that's part of the bigger play to end the war in Ukraine. But Eric, say you're still working for the CIA. Are you going to Pete Hegseth's team, Donald Trump's team, and saying, hey, look, this might not be a good idea?
If I was still working for the CIA, what I would definitely be doing is asking for a lot more information and a lot more data. What I want to make sure of, if I'm working for the government or in a strategic position, I want to make sure, is there a bigger plan? Have we thought 10 moves ahead? Because in cybersecurity, it's not about reactionary moves. It's not about 1 or 2 moves ahead. It's about stepping back and saying, okay, what is the adversary going to do? Predict 10 moves ahead. And to me, if this is part of a bigger plan where we're thinking 10 moves ahead and we know what we're doing and there's going to be other activity, then I think this is a good thing. If this is just a short-term olive branch of, hey, let's try to show goodwill to Russia, and there's not a bigger plan and there's not a bigger strategy, then to me it would be very, very concerning.
Eric Cole, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.